I'm Denton Davidson, senior editor for Gold Derby, and I'm here with Tobias Lindholm, director of The Good Nurse, starring Oscar winners Jessica Chastain and Eddie Redmayne. And Tobias, we live in a society right now that's obsessed with true crime and serial killers, and yet I've never heard of this story, and neither has, most of the other people that I've spoken to about it. So, why has this flown under the radar for so long?
I actually don't know, and I'm quite surprised as well. I mean, I would be the kind of guy who would know about this. I worked on Mindhunter with David Fincher, and I thought that we had covered and read and did all our research on the American, phenomenon with serial killers, and then yet the most prolific one we had never heard of. So I don't know, but maybe it's part of the movie's theme, which is the systems and the institutions' talent to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe there's been so strong interest to not get this story out that they have managed to do so. I mean, Graeber's book came out a decade ago. And we should have heard about this. It should have been all over the place, and changes should have been done, you could say. And nevertheless, here we are, surprised that it ever happened.
When did you first hear about it and then become attached to direct?
So I heard about this 7 years ago. I was sent Christy Wilson Cain's first draft and read it and saw that she had put out the stepping stones for a hero's journey where we could follow Amy Loughren, the female nurse who stopped Charlie Cullen, instead of just another serial killer movie with a huge fascination of, the darkness. So I called Christy right away and talked to her about it. She agreed that that version was the most interesting one. And we then just started to, get rid of all the scenes that were references to other serial killer films, and instead making references into the reality that we were portraying, the life at hospitals, the life of Amy Loughren. And slowly we started to find the truth about the story, you could say, without being, which we were, slaves of the conventions of serial killer movies.
And Charles Graeber wrote the book that, that was a source material for so much information about Charles Cullen. What was it like? And Amy had said she was surprised when she found out she was sort of, a focus of the film. What was that meeting like the first time you met with Amy?
Well, I met her quite fast after I read it the first time, just because I needed some of these details confirmed. It felt, as a storyteller, not as a citizen, but as a storyteller, it felt almost too good to be true that this vulnerable, brave, strong nurse had befriended a serial killer and then used that friendship to stop him. So I had to get some of these details confirmed from her. I met her, and it just confirmed my thought that she was the main character. She's a very strong, unselfish, warm human being who in many ways reminded me of my mom, who was the warm hands in the Danish healthcare system, being a social worker and taking care of a lot of people beside, raising me and my older brother on her own. So I felt at home with her, and I felt that we could do a very rare thing where we would celebrate the lonely moms out there, the struggling women that basically keeps everything together while the rest of us are out to do bravado and, and hunt all that. And there was something in that just made sense. Not that I couldn't see the rest of Graeber's wonderful book, because Graeber's book is not a fascination of Charlie Cullen, but I never felt that the question, why did Charlie do it, was the interesting part. The real question was, how was he allowed to keep going?
Yeah.
Why didn't the system stop him? And that became the focus of Amy's journey.
It reminded me almost of, how we found out about priests that get moved to different churches when they've been, found out to be abusive. What did you learn about the American healthcare system and how they moved him from one hospital to the next, trying to really, avoid their own liability and what was happening? essentially.
Well, I'm Danish. I'm from a small social democracy in Scandinavia. We're pretty spoiled with social healthcare and we have a very, in that way, well-functioning healthcare system. But nevertheless, we also have systemic problems. We also see how institution ends up turning against us if we as individuals do not insist on humanity. What I learned about the American healthcare system was that money had even more power than I thought. When you put money before patients, tragedy will come. It was said to me by Christie, our writer, and I really recognized that getting into how and why this was happening. I think that the nurses and the doctors in the American healthcare system are doing a tremendous job. I think that the possibilities they're giving, the frame, the everyday life they're giving is not necessarily that great. But I did recognize these systems that seems to turn against us. And that's a Danish issue as well as an American issue. But it's not a nice thought that, or let me rephrase that, it's a very scary thought that somebody knew and for profit didn't stop him.
And let's talk about the cast. You've got two Oscar winners leading the way here. You got Jessica Chastain and Eddie Redmayne. What was the casting process like for that? How did you get those two involved in the picture? And then what was it like working with those two?
Well, luckily, Jessica hadn't won her Oscar when I worked with her, so I only had to, my ego only had to feel threatened by one. No, I'm kidding. I was blessed with this cast. I mean, I've been a Jessica Chastain fan since I saw Zero Dark 30. It was actually the first film I ever saw where I bought the 3 p.m. ticket and then just went straight around and saw 5:30 p.m. As well. I was mesmerized by the humanity and the coldness and the control and the chaos and everything she expressed in that part. And reading this, she was first to mind, like, if I need to portray this struggling single mom nurse in present America, then I need her. She seemed perfect for it. And they were, Eddie came to mind because we kind of needed, the nicest guy to be out there, and we needed something unexpected. And I remember we sat there, and as you sometimes do, the studio will give you a list of actors that they think can finance or can sell enough tickets or whatever. And those are very boring, speculations and conversations. So we got rid of those lists and just talked about which actors had moved us lately. And the movie's producer, Scott Franklin, had just seen A Theory of Everything together with his oldest son. So he said Eddie Redmayne, and I felt it right away how right that idea was. And I don't know, 5-6 days later, I met Eddie in London. He said yes because he really wanted, well, I think he liked the project, but he also wanted to find something to do with Jessica. They have a long friendship behind them. So, I was blessed to have these, best actors of our generation that, insisted on doing a film together. And I was just there at the right time.
Yeah. And it's a twist for Eddie because, we're not used to seeing him in sort of this mindset. And we see, that lovable Eddie that everyone likes so much throughout part of the film. And then towards the end, we're able to see that other side of him. And, did he have reference for some of those, interview scenes, and was he able to watch those and sort of get an idea of, how to embody Charles Cullen?
Yeah, so Charles Graeber, the writer of the book, he had a huge archive of photos and also audio recordings, things that we could listen to, and even videos where we could study, and where Eddie and his physical coach and a dancer he worked with in London, they studied Charles Cullen's movement to try to see how Eddie should find his way. And it seems like that Eddie's process is a physical one, like he needs to find a physical frame of the character and thereby find the logic of him, which was a beautiful thing for me to study, to see how he went for it. But we had the footage, we had lots of material that we could take from, and just finish these details about the character. But I think that looking at Eddie's work and theory of everything, I think there are similarities where there's two sides of our main character, where we will see that there's one he presents when he wants to be strong, and there's a sadness or sorrow behind it. And I definitely saw a potential in dragging on some of the same tools. In this one, clearly much more clear, because it is like two persons that we meet. It just felt right. And as soon as Eddie started to talk to me about how he wanted to do this, I was so thrilled to see how precise and professionally he's working. It was pretty amazing.
What was the most difficult thing about shooting this film?
Well, it took us a long time to get it made, so it was pretty hard to get everybody on board with the idea of making a serial killer movie about humanity. But other than that, I actually think that it was insisting that we were on the right path. There were so many times during the shoot where we started to doubt the strategy. Are we doing the right thing by just portraying Eddie as this nice guy? How long can we keep the secret? And the fact that we wouldn't allow ourselves to make references to other serial killer movies, that we didn't want to do the cliche scenes, was pretty hard. And I realized how much of a slave I am of the conventions, that even on set, even the way we would block the scenes, I would still once in a while, realize that I was just about to do a scene that we had seen before, because it kind of asked to be there, and we needed to insist on our own way. So I think that was the hardest part. And then clearly the fact that we shot during COVID, so I would, not in my mother tongue, but in English on my first American feature, direct with a mask on, which made things a little more difficult. But it wasn't that bad. It was, I had a great group of filmmakers with me, so it was all right.
And you're also a writer, director. You're multiple films, obviously, but including the best foreign language film Oscar winner, Another Round, a couple of years ago. How do you, when you get projects sent your way, how do you decide what you want to write and what you want to direct?
Well, that's a good question, and not until lately I've realized that the films that I've directed all have one thing in common, which is a portrayal of an individual caught in a system, caught in some, and I think there's something there about the system, a critique of systems, and a warning that we need to make sure that they do not turn against us. And it's not until now that I've realized that that's it. But normally as a writer, I will, if I don't write for myself and I'm writing for Thomas, I've been writing for Thomas Vinterberg the last 14 years, and then so basically our rhythm have been that I've been writing one for me and one for him, and then we will both go shoot at the same time, and we've done that since A Hijacking and The Hunt was like that. And when I'm writing with Thomas, I'm writing the best possible Thomas Vinterberg film I can. I know him now, so I kind of want to feed the best options for him to go out with. He can do things as a director that I would never dream of doing. There are scenes in The Hunt that I would delete right away, and then he would put them back in, and they end up becoming, the best scenes in the film because he knew how to do them. When I'm picking scripts or stories, for me, it's always with a recognition of that it says something about our time, the time we live in. It's always some sort of comment on the world we're in, and I think it's connected to the fact that I'm extremely bored with my own imagination. I think it's super boring. When I was a kid, I was like 7, and I realized that the toy soldiers I was playing with didn't have any emotions. They wouldn't be dead. I could just play with them again tomorrow, and suddenly the point of that game went away. And I feel kind of the same as a director, I need to go out and find the logic in the world around me. Then I can be fascinated, but my own imagination doesn't really get me.
You mentioned being a kid. Who were your influences as a kid, or was there a film that you watched that just wowed you and made you want to become a filmmaker?
Well, I'm from a small town, 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers south of Copenhagen, and no one in my family ever made films, so I actually didn't know. I didn't really watch. I think we had a black and white TV until I was 12. I never had a VHS that I could watch films at home until much later. So it came pretty late, and it came with the Dogma movement in '96. I've been 19 at the time, and I realizing like how mesmerized I was by the realism, by the naturalism of those films, and they opened the door. Around the same time, Nicholas Winding Refn did his first, another Danish director did his first Danish film, Pusher, which is also extremely naturalistic and reminded me of the neighborhood that I grew up in, with these Danish drug gangsters, and that was what really got me going. Like that was what inspired me and made me think I can do this. And then later, 6-7 years later, I applied to film school. It's a very small film school in Denmark, so every second year they accept 6 students. So it's a very, very small one, but I managed finally to get in, and then I started to watch films. We had film history on Mondays, and we would just watch like world cinema, everything. Great guy called Ulrik Breuning, who would show us all these films, and then I really started to understand what cinema was. And the first American director that I completely connected to was John Cassavetes. I think watching A Woman Under the Influence, I realized that you could make a beautiful film about something as gray as my childhood. There was something about being in that world and insisting, and the magic of naturalism that really struck me with that film and opened me to all of his films. And then I found the Belgian Dardenne brothers and saw all their work. So slowly my world would expand, and I would get to, and now I'm at a point where I'm watching films as much as I can, and I'm starting to rewatch them all with my 13-year-old son, which is a great joy.
And how did you get
out of US? Sorry, but out of US, my biggest hero is definitely John Cassavetes, and I'm proudly on his shoulders.
Wow. And how did you get that first break then? Like, what was your first sort of because now you're so successful, BAFTA nominations, and your films are up for Oscars. So what was that first sort of in for you?
It sounds so great when you say it. It doesn't feel like that, right? I'm still just missing my mom, and I can't sleep nights and all that. So but nothing has changed. But I was blessed with, I was 28. I've been doing graffiti my whole life. That was my thing until I started to write. So when I got into film school,
like actual spray paint,
like graffiti,
oh, okay.
that was the thing. Big scene in Copenhagen, very inspired by the New York graffiti scene back in the 80s. So we would do that, and I wouldn't have any. I wouldn't go to school, and I would just have a job as a night guard at a mental institution, and be in that world. And then I started to write. I got into film school, and I decided to just work. This was my chance. I just needed to work as hard as possible, write as much as possible, not that anything stopped me, and then hopefully after 2 years be qualified to go out and actually do something. So I did that, and then a month, maybe 2 weeks before I graduated, Thomas Vinterberg's producer called me and asked if I wanted to write Thomas's next film. And I was like, what?
Wow.
And I think he was on the board that accepted me at film school. So they kept an eye on my work and seeing. And for some reason, they felt that Thomas needed a new writing partner, maybe someone who could come in and remind him of how great he was. So that was my first gig. And at the same time, in film school, I've been writing this Danish prison film about a friend of mine who got incarcerated while I was in film school, and I realized what the Danish prison system was, and I had to write something about it. And this producer came to me and said, do you want to direct it? And I was educated as a screenwriter. I'd never been on a film set before. So I was like, I don't know if I can do that. He said, well, if you can write it, as a low budget, I think that I can finance it. And then I called a good friend who's a documentary director and asked if he wanted to be part of it. So we ended up directing that together within the first year out of film school. I had Thomas Vinterberg going, and I was directing my own first film. And then on top of that, we would start to write the political Danish show called Borgen, that's on Netflix now, which ended up becoming a huge success. So it kind of came, without me really realizing.
Wow.
What was going on. So it was a pretty hectic time. But at the time, I was, 32 years old. I had nothing behind me. So, luckily I found something in front of me.
Well, it sounds like you made the right choice. The Good Nurse is out in select theaters and available to stream on Netflix. I want to tell everyone watching to head over to goldderby.com, make your Oscar predictions, check out more interviews with this year's top contenders. And Tobias, best of luck. And it was a pleasure to speak with you about your film, The Good Nurse.
Thank you so much for your time.